It was a warm afternoon in the busy street of Los Angeles. FBI Special Agent Ana Lopez, a brilliant and accomplished Latina woman, was driving back to her office after concluding an intense investigation. She'd been tracking a notorious smuggling ring for months and was on the verge of cracking the case. Despite the long hours and mounting stress, Ana felt proud of her work. She had overcome countless obstacles as one of the few Latina agents in a predominantly white, male-dominated field, and she had earned her place among the elite. As Ana drove through the lively streets, her mind was filled with details of the case. She replayed the latest intel, piecing together leads in her head. Suddenly, she noticed flashing blue lights in her rearview mirror. Confused, Ana glanced at her speedometer. She wasn't speeding. She couldn't think of any reason she'd be pulled over, but she dutifully steered her car to the curb, ready to cooperate. A police cruiser pulled up behind her, and out stepped Officer Rick, a tall, stern-faced white man. His hand rested on the holster of his gun as he approached her car. Ana rolled down her window, calm but cautious. She retrieved her FBI badge, prepared to explain her role in law enforcement. "Good afternoon, officer. Is there a problem?" she asked politely. Officer Rick barely looked at her. "License and registration," he barked, his voice cold and dismissive. Ana was taken aback by his tone but remained professional. "I'm an FBI agent." "Here's my badge," she said, holding it up for him to see. Rick gave her badge a cursory glance, then repeated his demand. "I said license and registration." Ana felt a chill run down her spine. She dealt with difficult officers before, but Rick's hostility felt different. She sensed the situation escalating and knew she had to stay calm. "Officer, I'm a federal agent, and I'm on official duty," she reiterated, hoping to defuse the tension, but Rick's eyes narrowed. Ignoring her entirely, he commanded, "Step out of the vehicle." Ana's pulse quickened as she realized he wasn't interested in resolving this civilly. "Excuse me? Are you deaf? Step out of the vehicle." His raised voice attracted the attention of nearby pedestrians, who began to watch the scene unfold. Ana took a deep breath. She was within her rights to stay in her car, but she could tell that defying Rick would only worsen the situation. She complied, slowly opening her door and stepping out with her hands in plain view. As soon as she exited, Rick grabbed her arm and shoved her against her car. "Hey! What are you doing?" Ana protested, her voice filled with disbelief. "Resisting arrest, huh?" Rick sneered, twisting her arm behind her back as he cuffed her wrists. "You think flashing a badge makes you special?" Ana winced at the pain in her wrists. People were now recording the incident on their phones, whispering and shaking their heads. She felt her face flush with a mix of humiliation and anger, but she kept her head held high. "Officer Rick, you're making a mistake," she said, her voice steady despite her fury. "Shut your mouth," he spat, shoving her towards the patrol car. "You're not above the law." Rick ignored her attempts to reason with him as he forced her into the back seat. She caught glimpses of bystanders staring in disbelief, some murmuring, but no one stepped forward to intervene. As the car pulled away, Ana's mind raced. This wasn't just an ordinary arrest, it felt targeted, personal. She took deep breaths, willing herself to remain calm. She'd been trained to handle high-stress situations, but this felt different. Rick's words and actions weren't just about authority, they were laced with contempt. Rick smirked through the rearview mirror. "Thought you could pull a fast one, didn't you?" Ana's jaw tightened. "I'm not pretending. I am a federal agent, and you're making a serious mistake." Rick laughed. "Sure you are. And I'm the mayor." After what felt like an eternity, the car pulled up to a small, isolated precinct outside the city. Ana's heart sank as she realized Rick had intentionally brought her somewhere off the beaten path, away from her usual colleagues or any witnesses who might intervene. He yanked her out of the car, sneering, "Welcome to my territory, agent." Inside the dimly lit station, Rick led her past indifferent officers who didn't even glance up. Anna knew she couldn't rely on anyone here to help her. She was truly on her own. Rick shoved her into an interrogation room and left her there alone, still cuffed. The cold metal bit into her skin as she took deep breaths, working to keep her composure. She'd endured a lot in her career, but nothing had prepared her for this blatant abuse of power. After a few minutes, another officer entered the room. He looked younger, with an uneasy expression on his face. "Agent Lopez, I'm Officer James. I was told to process you for holding." Anna noted the hesitation in his voice and the guilty flicker in his eyes. Maybe he could help her. She looked at him, her voice steady but firm. "You know this isn't right." James glanced over his shoulder nervously, as if worried Rick would overhear. "I don't make the rules," he mumbled, avoiding her gaze. Anna leaned forward slightly, keeping her voice calm. "You don't have to make the rules, but you can choose not to follow orders that you know are wrong." James paused, his hand trembling as he took notes. Anna could see him wrestling with his conscience. He finally looked up, and she held his gaze. Maybe, just maybe, he could be an ally. I'll see what I can do," he whispered. Just then, the door burst open, and Rick stormed in, glaring at James. "What's taking so long?" James shot Anna a look that was almost apologetic before turning back to his notepad, his face flushed. Anna's eyes followed him as he left the room, leaving her once again alone with Rick. Rick leaned down, inches from her face. "I don't care who you think you are. Here, you're nothing but another criminal." Anna met his gaze without flinching. "I've dealt with threats bigger than you, Officer Rick. You won't get away with this." Rick's smirk wavered slightly before he straightened up, laughing. "We'll see about that," he muttered as he left her alone once more, closing the door behind him. Anna exhaled slowly, her mind racing. She'd been put through rigorous training for moments like this, though she'd never imagined it would be at the hands of another officer. But she knew this fight wasn't over. She'd find a way to make sure Officer Rick faced the consequences of his actions. The room was silent after Rick's departure. The only sound Anna could hear was the ticking of the clock mounted on the wall. She felt the sting of the handcuffs biting into her wrists, but forced herself to focus. She wasn't going to let Rick or anyone else humiliate her without a fight. As she waited, tension thickened in the air, and her mind raced through scenarios. Her badge was still in her pocket, but she knew calling for help wasn't an option unless someone sympathetic was willing to listen. A sudden noise startled her. The door creaked open, and Officer James returned, glancing nervously over his shoulder before shutting the door behind him. He looked pale, as if he was grappling with something he hadn't prepared for. "Agent Lopez," he whispered, barely making eye contact. "I'm not supposed to be here, but this isn't right." He held out a small key for the cuffs, glancing at the door. Anna's pulse quickened. She watched him closely, trying to gauge if this was some kind of test. But she could see the worry etched in his face. "You know he's breaking the law," she whispered back. "Help me, and you won't regret it." James hesitated, clearly terrified, but his conscience seemed to win out. He quickly unlocked her cuffs, and Anna rubbed her sore wrists as he tucked the cuffs back into his pocket. "There's a back exit down the hallway. I can distract him long enough for you to get out," he murmured. Before she could thank him, the door swung open, and Rick appeared, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. He glanced between Anna and James, as if sensing something was wrong. "What the hell are you doing in here?" he demanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. James stammered, trying to come up with an excuse. I was just following protocol, sir. Making sure she was secure." Rick's gaze darkened, and he took a step closer to James. "Get out. Now." James looked at Anna, his face pleading with her to stay safe, before he turned and left, casting one last glance over his shoulder. Rick turned back to Anna, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "You're really starting to test my patience, Agent Lopez. You think you can walk in here and do whatever you want?" Anna held her ground, her eyes locked on his. I haven't broken any laws, officer. You're the one crossing the line. Rick scoffed, pacing back and forth. You think you're untouchable, don't you? Well, newsflash. I don't care who you are or where you're from. Here you're nothing. He took a step closer, his face inches from hers. She could feel his anger radiating off him. I could make you disappear, and no one would ask questions. Nobody would care. Anna's heart raced, but she refused to back down. You may think you have control now, but I promise you, you're going to regret this. Rick laughed, his eyes filled with malice. Oh, I don't think so. Without another word, he grabbed her roughly by the arm and yanked her out of the interrogation room, forcing her down the hall. She struggled, trying to free herself from his iron grip. What are you doing? She demanded. Rick said nothing. His jaw clenched, dragging her through the precinct and into an old, dimly lit cell at the far end of the station, isolated from any of the main areas. With a sharp shove, he pushed her inside, slamming the door shut with a resounding clang. The small, bare room was cold and silent. Anna could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears as she glanced around, realizing that this cell was far away from the central holding area. She doubted anyone would even know she was there. Hours passed, with Anna pacing the cell, every fiber of her being on edge. She knew she couldn't stay in here indefinitely. Her team would eventually notice her absence, but with Rick's threats hanging over her, she had to act fast. Suddenly, footsteps echoed outside her cell, and she braced herself. The door swung open, but it wasn't Rick who entered. It was James. He looked frantic, his face pale as he whispered, "He's planning to take you out of here after dark." Anna's stomach twisted. Why? What's he planning to do? James's voice trembled. I don't know, but he's called in favors from some shady people. He's desperate to make sure you're never seen again. Panic crept into her mind, but she forced herself to stay calm. Then help me get out of here, James. This is your chance to do the right thing. James nodded, glancing over his shoulder before pulling out a set of keys. There's a service entrance down the hall, and an alleyway behind the building. If we move now, I can get you out of here. With James leading the way, Anna slipped out of the cell, moving swiftly down the empty corridor. They were almost at the exit when they heard Rick's voice, shouting in the distance. Where do you think you're going, Lopez? She and James froze, realizing they were out of time. Rick was charging down the hallway, his expression twisted with rage. Go, Anna, James urged, shoving her toward the door. I'll hold him off. Anna didn't want to leave James to face Rick's wrath, but she knew it was her only chance. She sprinted through the door, bursting into the alley and disappearing into the shadows as Rick's furious shouts echoed behind her. Outside in the dark, quiet night, Anna knew she was far from safe. She was in uncharted territory, a fugitive from someone who was supposed to uphold the law. But as she blended into the city streets, she promised herself that Rick would face justice for everything he had done. Her heart pounded as she hurried through the shadows, her mind racing with plans. She couldn't risk going back to her office until she knew she'd shaken Rick and anyone else working with him. For now, she was on her own, but she was determined to expose Rick's corruption. The fight was far from over, and Anna knew she would stop at nothing to bring him down.